Now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition here on Point of View, and we have, of course, the team that we so enjoy having around the round table. That would be Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. I might just mention that we will spend a fair amount of time today talking about the criminal justice system for a couple of reasons. We've got a very good piece by John Lott, which I think really counters some of the arguments being made right now. We also have a piece by Heather McDonald. You might remember, as we've talked about before, the accidental shooting of Dante Wright, because that particular officer thought she had in her hands a taser rather than a gun. And Heather McDonald addresses this issue of whether or not we should no longer let law enforcement be involved in traffic stops, or that they should not be allowed to have guns at traffic stops. And we'll get into some of those issues. Also, the whole issue of the pandemic, and are we going to return to normal life, given the fact that the number of people struck right now by COVID-19 worldwide is huge, even though our numbers are going down. And we'll get into some issues like critical race theory and many, many other topics. But Penna Dexter, one of the things we've posted here is about Packing the Court by Liberty McCarter. And Kelly Shackelford, of course, is spending a fair amount of time talking about this danger of the packing of the court. But I think we have some announcements, don't we?
I think we do. First of all, let me say, if we're going to vote on masks outdoors, I vote no. And I've always voted no on that one. But yes.
Maybe they can wear them as long as it says, I am really not very smart on the mask.
Well, that's kind of what, I hate to say that, but that's kind of what it says when you see that. Yes, the issue of court packing, unfortunately, it's not front and center in the national discussion, but it's becoming more so because of the efforts of certain people. One of the most important ones that is sitting around this table, Kelly Shackelford and First Liberty Institute, has really taken this on because it's a constitutional attack. And it will change our country forever if this were to ever happen in as this president would like to see it happen, I think. So First Liberty has really taken this on as a project, as have others, and it's getting a little more play. I have noticed a few articles in the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, and apparently another one is about to hit. Kelly?
Yeah, we just released a poll, a national poll by Mason-Dixon of the country and where they are on this, and it's great news, I think, for people who actually want to keep freedom in the country. I can explain why, if we need to, at some point, why if you ever start court packing, your freedoms are gone. Other countries show this. They understood this in 1936 and 37 when FDR tried to do this, because the political branch takes over the courts is what happens. You just add however many justices you need to get to the political results you want.
So it's almost like you don't have a court.
You don't have any more freedoms. It's just an adjunct of the political body. And so whatever your constitutional right that you care about is, you don't have it anymore. You say, oh, come on, I still have a right to free speech. No, you have the right to free speech as long as the party in control wants you to have the right. If they decide they don't want you to have the right, they just add however many justices they need to make sure you don't. I mean, you can see how that would easily happen on things like the Second Amendment and so many issues, even property rights. What if the government wanted to say, well, if you're a certain wealth level, we're going to take 50% of your assets? Well, normally that would be a violation of, private property rights under the Constitution. Not if you just add justices to take it away. So I don't care what your right is. It's gone if you court pack. And once you start, you don't stop. And we've seen Venezuela, other countries do this. And, I mean, we've seen what happened to Venezuela so quickly. So this is something we've got to stop. Now, the good news is we just finished the polling and released it, and 68% of the country is against court packing. And this is really before they even understand what it all means. And it's even better news than that. It's not just 68%. 68% of independents are against it. It's 2-1. Independents are against this. Now, you might think, good, then we can just rest, right? We can, the country's against this. No. 73% of Democrats are in favor of it. So you've got a president who's Democrat, you got a Senate, a House. So you can see how they could easily, push something through that the whole country is against, that would be really disastrous for the country, would really end one of our three branches of government. So, anyway, the polling is encouraging in some ways, but people have to really be diligent because, this is a danger, and it will be until this is stopped. I mean, our goal is not just to stop this, but to really slay it in public, so that everybody in the country goes, this is bad. We don't want this, and all parties hopefully at some point can come together. But it's a real danger, and people, if they want info, I think there's probably a link on pointofview.net, but it's supremecoup, COUP.com, because this is a coup on our Supreme Court. I mean, this is an attempt to take over the Supreme Court. And so supremecoup.com has tons of information, scholarly papers, sound bites, a 3-minute video. I mean, everything you would want, what's happened in other countries. And that's going to be updated constantly as we're going through this battle.
So this really stands in the United States Senate is where the battle is, and of course the public opinion. And as you said, it's a public battle that needs to be taken care of immediately, as in when FDR pushed this.
That's right.
It was taken care of, and it's because some principled Democrats opposed it. And, in that sense, I think that's the same situation now. Certain Democrats in the Senate, they need to understand where the country is on this. I mean, you said, Democrats are for this by 73%, but in some parts of the country, these senators need Republicans to keep their offices. And so it would be important to let them know that this is not a popular thing.
Right. And the part of the danger, too, if you see what happened in 1936 and 37 under FDR, the public rose up. I mean, they saw this quickly. This is tyranny. This is and Democratic people, both in the House and the Senate, stood up and opposed it. But the fact that they did this really intimidated the court.
Yeah.
And this is the reason all the New Deal legislation got through and was not unconstitutional, was because the court was scared. And for over a decade, we lost the Supreme Court. So we need to very strongly, make sure that everyone in the country knows how illegitimate and wrong this is, because we don't want to lose the court either for the next 10 or 15 years.
Let me just, if I can, at least help everybody in customer service, because I know they're going to get all sorts of calls. Where do I find that survey? So if you go to supremecoup.com, you don't notice it right away, but the upper right-hand corner there is a red bar that says what Americans really think about court packing. If you click on that, there's 7 pages. So if you want to use that to send to your elected representative or to post on Facebook or Twitter, it's there. I just looked on Wall Street Journal. They haven't posted yet, but it's probably going to come out shortly. So if you're, if you're looking for it right now, don't call our 800 number, because I know what happens as soon as Kelly says, we got that survey, and everybody says, where can I find it? So go to supremecoup.com and look at that red bar, and then you'll find it. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Biden administration thinks that they may have found a way to promote higher corporate taxes to American voters. President Joe Biden and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen claim that it is all about ending the global race to the bottom. It is obvious that the president wants to raise our corporate taxes, but who knew that he also wanted to raise them across the world? He and the Treasury Secretary want to establish a minimum global corporate tax rate. A little history's in order. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act reformed America's corporate tax code after many other nations had already taken steps to reform their tax code. If you look at the various European countries in the OECD, most of them have a corporate tax rate similar to America's 21% corporate tax rate. President Biden wants to raise the corporate rate to 28%. That might encourage some companies to move their headquarters or their operations to other countries. And in the past, there were many news stories about corporate inversions where a company reincorporates abroad to reduce their tax burden. There haven't been too many news stories like that in recent years because of the 2017 corporate tax cut. If President Biden is successful in raising the U.S. corporate tax rate, he would hope that Secretary Yellen would also convince other countries to raise their rates so that America wouldn't lose U.S. companies. This attempt to establish a global minimum corporate tax example of tax competition. Some countries are willing to have a lower tax rate to encourage business development. That is good for those countries and good for those companies. It's not a race to the bottom. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join the conversation at any point, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. It is, of course, our weekend edition. Might just mention we have this booklet on just kind of a biblical view of criminal justice, but we're also going to try to bring to the table some facts and figures that just don't seem to make their way out. And that's why, again, if you listen to Point of View, we have a very good piece by John Lott, who actually does kind of analysis of the whole issue of racism in police killings. And then I've added to that once a little bit further down on the list by Heather McDonald. Both these people have been on the program, really dealing with ever since the accidental shooting of Dante Wright. Some suggest that maybe police officers should not have weapons when they go to a traffic stop. Have you seen the number of police officers been killed at traffic stops? Or that maybe just law enforcement shouldn't be involved in traffic stops in the first place. And so both of these pieces are just great material for you if you want to try to think through some of these issues. But, Penn, of course, we've had a verdict in Minneapolis, and I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, it came so quickly. It was kind of surprised people, I think. But that's partly because I think there was just so much pressure for a guilty verdict. And, you know, I really doubt whether it was given the introspection that needed to be given to all the facts of the case. Let's put it that way. For one thing, and this is in the article that you posted by John Lott, and he's a master statistician. In fact, he's got this group called the Crime Prevention Research Center that probably has better data than the federal government has on these issues. And one of the points he makes is that no one said that Officer Chauvin was racist. No one ever was able to make that point, or they didn't even consider that in the trial. And also this stats that he presents, which there's a lot of ones in this article. People ought to go there and read them. But one is that black officers are at least as likely as their white as their white peers to kill black suspects. So, you know, a lot of this, of course, was the mob demands, the demands by Representative Maxine Waters, Joe Biden's statements. There were just tons of pressure for this verdict. And the sad part about it is perhaps it would have been a guilty verdict anyway, but it really doesn't give people a whole lot of confidence that this was a well, let's say it was conducted well, but that it was really a jury that really took into consideration everything surrounding this.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern I have is one that I think many of us have for all of these issues, which is the approach now, whether it's on these, having good voter integrity, where people can have confidence in the results, that kind of legislation, or this trial is a great example, is most people could see right through a lot of these things that are being said, and they're just, the media and everybody else are just saying conclusions. They say, well, this voter legislation is racist. And you're like, oh, you read the story and you're like, okay, I'm looking for the evidence or the provision and it never happens. And just like in this trial, it's like, what is the first thing the president of the United States says? He comes out and says, this is racism. There's no proof anywhere of racism with the Derek Chauvin trial. None. Now, I mean, he could be a really bad police officer who's just, abuses his position against everybody. I'm not saying he's not racist. None of us know. I mean, there's just no evidence. And so I think everybody's getting tired. This is why the confidence in the media, the mainstream media, the most recent poll is 8%. 8%.
I shared that yesterday. I was hoping you would share that.
Yeah. And
it's not even in double digits.
Yeah.
It's less than 10% of Americans trust the media now.
And look, I don't care what conclusion you come to. Just provide some evidence for your conclusion. Provide some rational basis for your conclusion. And to come out as the president of the United States and to call the Chauvin situation about racism, it's just irresponsible. It begets racism when you do that kind of thing. And it really, I think it devalues real racism, which does exist. And we see examples of that in different situations. I mean, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there were some kids that did some stuff at a school that's clearly racist. Now, that's something everybody can unite behind. But please, making everything racism when there's no evidence of it, all it does is divide people. It's an attempt to try to silence your opponent. We need people that'll stand up against that, because we need the free exchange of ideas. We need more than just conclusions. And people who are intimidated by this, don't express things that we would benefit from hearing. And so that's the thing that bothers me the most about the result. I'm also bothered about all the public press and everything, which could hurt due process, because if people think that trials are decided by how many riots there are and how many people are screaming and whether the president wants to comment on the case before it's done and Maxine Waters and all this, it really does harm the process. I do really believe the judge should have sequestered the jury, and I think some mistakes were made. But the rule of law is so valuable, and people just take it for granted. And when you lose it, it's hard to get it back. And so that there's a press of people wanting their results and not caring what they do to due process and rule of law, which is really important to everybody.
In so much of our discussion in this country today, if you use the accusation of racism, you pretty much end the discussion. And sadly, it seems as if that's what happened here. And I think the reaction is concerning, too. The idea that now our Attorney General is convening a pattern and practice investigation of the Minneapolis police. And, you can see this perhaps happening in other cities across the country. And so are we going to now operate from the supposition that American police are racist and have these inquiries across the country and start altering police practice from a federal level on down? I think that's a huge concern and could be a repercussion from this.
One of our callers is from Missouri. I was just thinking, remember when they had the investigation of Ferguson, Missouri?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so, when that happened, here we go again. Kelly, you mentioned something about media bias, and there have been some real criticism of, for example, NBC, because, again, I think many people are familiar with the issue with Michaela Bryant. This is a woman that has the knife. First of all, I think if you watch the body cam, 13 seconds from the time you to exit the car to firing a gun. I mean, I can't even imagine what you're going through. But NBC has been really criticized for editing out some of the key information, not showing the knife and those kinds of things. But then on the other side, you had CNN, which you had Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo actually recognizing the kind of difficulty that police officers have, and interestingly enough, just been railed upon by the leftist mob because they actually tried to bring some sanity to a horrible and a very difficult set of circumstances. Any comments from either of you?
Yeah, a lot of people jumping to conclusions before they have the information. I mean, you think about, people who have stated publicly in different contexts, well, let's wait and see what the evidence shows us, who've been fired,
Yes.
who've lost their position.
Yes, that's right.
It's like
Due process mentioned the other day right there in the Brooklyn
Yes.
group, and he's off just
Yes.
because he uses the word due process. I didn't know that was a racist word.
and this is common. This is becoming common. So people need to understand this is an attack upon, having due process. And I'm telling you, everybody in this country wants due process. You want to have the
You may
ability.
not know you do, but you do.
Yeah. or if not,
Someday
then,
you're going to want it.
Yeah, guilty until proven innocent is not our system, but it's about to be.
It
if
is.
people, and again, this all goes back to what we've talked about before. The Live Not by Lies book, the Right Raiders. When this stuff is coming, this is revolutionary stuff. This is stuff to change our country, to throw out the most basic protections people have. It'll happen if people aren't willing to stand up and speak the truth, even if it costs them. And everybody has to start doing that. Even if there's a charge of racism that's just ridiculous, stand in the face of it and speak the truth, or we're going to lose these things that everybody values.
There's
Again,
such an intimidation against doing that right now.
I was just going to say that, everybody from Dennis Prager to Matt Walsh, individuals been on this program, to a person, they're all saying the one thing that's in short supply right now is courage. And so we need to be courageous. Well, let's take a break. We got some phone calls. And as we go to a break, we've been talking about hope for America. And you say, well, what hope do we have? By speaking the truth and talking about some of these issues that maybe you're only hearing here on Point of View. So visit the website. We'll be back with more right after this.
Have you ever met a child that you knew would do great things? Perhaps they displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, a zeal for learning. Now imagine you take that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, you feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from mainstream media, and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive the facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Let's head out to the state of Missouri first. And Steve, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you very much for having me today.
What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, it was interesting you brought up the Ferguson deal, but I was talking mainly about the police officer in Michigan or Minnesota. They have a medical examiner, and they did not have a coroner system that we have in place here in Missouri. We have a combination of medical examiners and coroners, and Ferguson, where that happened to be a medical examiner. But, you know, being a coroner, you can call what is called a coroner's inquest, which the sheriff gets 6 good people to sit and listen to the evidence and determine how this person died. And they make up the decision, not the coroner, not the medical examiner. They are presented the evidence. They make up that decision. The reason we use that a lot here in the state of Missouri is if you have a law enforcement shooting, it is a homicide. A homicide is one person killing another person. Question is it justified or unjustified? So if, say, you have an officer-involved shooting and the prosecutor says, yes, that's totally justified, we're not going to press charges. But we all know that one person killing another, there is no time limit to what charges could be filed. So the family could literally say, okay, we're going to get a prosecutor in there to file charges on this gentleman or lady 50 years down the road. But the coroner's inquest, which the medical examiner does the autopsy, not the coroner, they come up with the cause of death. And as a coroner, we don't let the medical examiners determine the manner of death. That's our decision. And it seems to be a system that is working in rural Missouri, but these big cities, you're getting influence, public, political media that seems to be wagging the tail of the dog instead of the other way around.
Good point. Well, thank you for educating us. I didn't know half of that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was so different across between rural and urban. But also, I just think a lot of it, there was medical evidence. I mean, the amount of fentanyl he had in his system, number one, the fact that he was pushing back against 4 officers and the car was shaking and he was a big man. And there's lots of reasons to be very careful with this, the suspect, and, to use a lot of caution against him turning something back on you. And so, that part of it, I think, whether that would weigh against what people saw on a cell phone video enough to exonerate him, we don't know. But we just see so much influence of mob and threat out there that causes people not to have a lot of confidence in this verdict.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues. Obviously, there's medical issues. I mean, why did he die, right? And I don't know that anybody totally knows. But obviously the jury had to come to the conclusion that he died because of Officer Chauvin, and that's a decision that juries are supposed to make ultimately about looking at all the evidence. What is, and they're supposed to do it beyond a reasonable doubt. But there were a number of things about the jury's decision that bothered me. It just went along with this whole narrative that they did it because of the mob, which I hope is not true. But these charges were just weird to me. The murder 2, which is essentially felony murder. That means you're committing another felony and then you murder somebody. That does not seem. It's more like you're doing a bank robbery and you kill somebody.
Right. It didn't seem to fit.
It didn't. And then the second one, the 3rd degree murder, didn't look to fit at all, which is it's essentially a charge of where you shoot aimlessly into a crowd, and you kill somebody. Again, didn't seem to be the right charge at all.
Maybe manslaughter, but the
and
murder
manslaughter.
charge.
And then manslaughter, which is more negligent, and you can see that. But why they found guilty on the first two? I mean, it made you think that they just kind of checked the box, and it happened so quickly too, which usually it takes jurors more time to look through the evidence. So it was worrisome. And you add that to all the things that were going on the outside. I mean, we just, look, I mean, it's to everybody's own self-interest to make sure that we're careful in jury trials with committing people, convicting them of murder. That's why it's, beyond all reasonable doubt. And so we need to make sure that the process has gone through and that the jury can make its decision. And it's making its decision under the law and not because of, outside pressure in either direction.
So
in any case,
comment by the president, comment by a member of Congress,
inappropriate.
A defense witness having pig's blood and a pig's head at their front door. I mean, you just start thinking about all the things that happened, and of course, you can't control all of that, but it's just something to consider. But since we're bringing up the issue of due process, I see one of our callers wants to address that issue too. So let's talk about that. Fran, WLPE in Georgia, you are on. What would you like to add?
When I was growing up in Mississippi, we studied the state's history of lynchings in the past of black people that weren't given due process. And I'm just thinking, does anybody realize that the very thing that they're wanting to do now, they are decrying in our history?
Yeah, I think there's a problem in a lot of these different areas right now with people not being incredibly short-sighted. They push for things because they want the immediate power or result that they want. And they're not thinking at all about what that means if they're successful. Court packing is a great idea, right? Hey, let's get control of the courts. Yeah, but you're destroying the courts, and hey, let's take away their due process. But you're not creating a precedent where you don't have due process protection. And I think there's an incredible short-sightedness in which it's sort of like a mob mentality, this sort of thirst for blood or whatever mentality where people are just blinded to anything but getting what they want right then. And, enough people have to stand up on the other side to say, and I think what's happening right now, I don't think that's a majority of people. I think it's a small, very, loud minority who is intimidating as many people as they can. And I think if the sleeping giant, which is Americans with common sense and that believe in fairness and treating people a certain way, will rise up, the mob will have to go home. But it's going to take that because it's sort of an in-your-face, intimidate you, call you names, call you racist, call you this and that, to try to see if they can shut you up. But it's very short-sighted. It's short-term what I want, despite whatever complete wreckage I'm creating to get there.
It's short-term, but I do think that it's also long-term because I think underneath all this, there's a revolution going on.
There you go.
You aptly named it in the battle against court packing, a coup. And so, I think we're going to talk a little bit later about how the president now and the Department of Education is going to be teaching critical race theory across the country under directive of the federal government. And, to me, that speaks of a well-thought-out revolution to change everything. And so a lot of this, really, we can see it all as part of that. Now, is everybody that's making these kinds of demands aware or supporting a revolution or a coup? No. But it's been constructed in minds of the far left, and it's all playing out before us.
Let me just mention, too, we were talking about the mob. I was just thinking, since I have such a supposedly good memory, that Penna Dexter and I, 9 years ago, did an interview with Ann Coulter. Remember her book at the time was called How the Liberal Mob is Endangering America. And when she was writing then, and I remember you and I doing the interview with her, I was thinking, well, sort of,
Yeah.
I think the book was just 9 years too early because now we all see the mob. But she was writing about that in 2012. 12.
Well, it was about the French Revolution.
Yes.
And so you could understand that history does repeat itself, and it was a warning. But yeah, I think if it had been a few years ahead of that, it would have informed people. I was thinking about that last night as I was reading about critical race theory, and thinking, wow, where's Ann Coulter? She needs to be out there talking about this and, getting her book a little revival.
I'm just thinking she just needs a second edition because everything she said in there is true, but now we have much better examples than when we talked with her before. Well, we're going to take a break, and for those of you listening online, you're going to hear Penna Dexter's commentary. When we come back, we might talk about that, the states versus the NCAA. Oh boy, here's another one where we need some courage. We'll be right back.
Legislators in Alabama recently passed and sent to their governor a law prohibiting K-12 schools from allowing biological boys to participate in girls' sports. That same week, North Dakota passed a similar bill. Other states, about 30 altogether, are considering or have already enacted legislation to protect girls' sports and to prevent female athletes from losing medals, titles, and scholarship opportunities to males who identify as females. The legislation in Alabama and North Dakota sent a message that their states will not be bullied by the National Collegiate Athletic Association. The votes in these states came within 48 hours of the NCAA's warning that it will be monitoring states' legislative activity and will not send an NCAA tournament to any state that prohibits biological boys from playing on girls' athletic teams. The organization stated, "This commitment is grounded in our values of inclusion and fair competition. This is not fair. Anyone with a pair of eyes and common sense understands that biological men competing against women have an unfair advantage in terms of physical strength. The NCAA says it requires testosterone suppression treatment for transgender women, i.e. biological men, to compete in women's sports. But the effects of testosterone on the male body remain. A new study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine affirms the athletic advantage of males undergoing testosterone-suppressing treatment over biological females. A compilation of other research shows that the muscular advantage enjoyed by trans women only falls by 5% the first year. Florida's State House was also quick to respond to the NCAA's threat by passing a bill banning biological men from women's teams. Senator Rick Scott tweeted a warning. If you keep threatening the public with your woke, elitist psychobabble, the NCAA will not last much longer. It's good to see states pushing back against one of the woke sports organizations trying to force its insanity on us. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you feel like we're moving our way through all these topics, it's because there are so many topics. And for those of you that listen online, you've already heard Penna Dexter's commentary. If you'd like to read it, we have posted it right now on the website. And if you sign up to receive the Viewpoints commentaries, you receive mine Monday through Friday and Penna's on Saturday. But it has to do with the NCAA, who thought that the National Collegiate Athletic Association will get so involved in politics as to say that any of you states which decide that you're going to ban transgender women, which would be boys who think they're women, from participating in women's athletics, that we will not hold any kind of championship in your state. I like what Lathan said yesterday. Yeah, see, trying to move the SEC championship out of Atlanta. But anyway, Penna, you've been writing about this, and here's a good example of really been kind of a test, because some governors have said, we're going to sign that bill. Other governors have said, we're going to veto that bill. So tell us what you found.
Well, first of all, it's taking the position of the tiniest demographic group in the country against the feminists, against women, which is half the country, but against the feminists who had gained, so much. And this is one area where I actually agreed with the feminist movement, was in the field of athletics, where women have all these opportunities for playing sports. They're being erased, and certainly women's sports teams, if this agenda is allowed to advance, will be gone. There won't be such thing. But what I will say, about 30 states are considering or have already enacted legislation to protect girls' sports from being basically invaded by biological men who believe that they are females or present themselves that way, competing against them. It's one of those scientific and common sense propositions that these people coming in to compete with women have an advantage, a physical advantage. And so, a lot of states are taking this up. There's a demand everywhere to take it up. And it's amazing how certain governors who you would think were fairly conservative, like in South Dakota, Kristi Noem, and now I think, Kerby, you mentioned in Kansas, the governors stood against it, to legislators passing these protective bills for women and governors standing against it. Well, there are some governors and some states that have been very courageous. And for instance, as you mentioned, the NCAA issued this directive, and within 2 days of that, 2 states, Alabama and also North Dakota, passed, and basically the governors either signed or promised to sign legislation that would ban biological boys and men from competing with women. And this goes K through 12. So this is even down in the elementary schools area. And one of the parts of this, I think, that is brought to bear in these legislative battles is some of the studies that are now coming out. The NCAA says that it requires testosterone suppression for transgender women, that's biological men, to compete in women's sports. But it's not like when you start suppressing testosterone that all the advantages go away. In fact, some of these studies are now showing that within a year, it's maybe only about 5% of a drop in strength or in effects from suppressing testosterone. So, a man is a man. And so I'm very proud of the states that are passing these things. I know that there's a big battle in some states. For instance, we're sitting in Texas right now, and it has passed. One of our legislative bodies is the House, I believe. The Senate. The House has not even brought it out for a vote. And, why? I mean, the answer is, what is the influence? I think a lot of it is these sports organizations that causes fear and lack of courage.
I can't imagine what the Speaker of the House, Phelan, thinks he's doing. He appointed, put this bill in a committee with a liberal chairman, knowing it's not going anywhere, and talk about backlash. The people of Texas are not in favor of biological males competing in girls' sports. This is not a close issue, and yet, it's probably not. I mean, we'll see if some other miracle. I mean, Speaker Phelan, if he doesn't wake up, I mean, he's gonna have some issues to deal with here in Texas. But it's an example. It's happened in a number of states where, I mean, look at what happened, with Kristi Noem. It's amazing. I mean, this is kind of a basic issue to most Americans. I don't want my 5'1" daughter or granddaughter competing with some muscular 6'4" male. It's stupid. I'm sorry. It's just, everybody knows it's dumb. And we've seen, everybody's seen the pictures of some of these athletic competitions where that's happened, and it's almost like a Babylon Bee thing. And so everywhere they're passing these things, you've got governors trying to veto, but their vetoes are being overridden. And so I think it's something that the people will eventually get, because otherwise there are no girls' sports. There are no women's sports. Because, a few biological males can wipe out all the records. Look at Connecticut, right? 20 state track records built over, I forget how many years, by 19 different females, wiped out in 1 year by a couple of transgender males.
It's the stories like that. I think that really, when you start to read their stories and understand that a lot of it is in individual sports, and these girls, they work hard, and they know they're working basically in Connecticut for third place. Yeah. They're not ever going to be able to win the ribbon. They may not even get the opportunity to be seen by the colleges for the scholarships unless the colleges are looking past that. And so, it's just, it's amazing, though, the power of the left on this issue. And it's, we've talked about the racial issue. I think the transgender issue has gained just an outsized amount of influence and power in policy today. And, when are we going to get some common sense and go back to the science? I don't know if we are. I hope we do.
And it's the same thing we talked about earlier. This is an issue that vast amount of the country is clear on. It's just they're being outshouted or they're being intimidated not to speak. And if enough people stand up and speak the truth, it'll be taken care of. And but it's going to take people standing up for their own daughters, for their own granddaughters, and we'll see. Well, I think it's starting to happen, but people need to kind of get their legs and stand for what's right.
If you can't get this passed in Texas, I worry about it.
And again, in 1984, the book, you have Winston Smith being convinced eventually through torture that 2 + 2 = 5.
Yes.
And this is a classic illustration of the fact that you have to tell the truth. You cannot live by lies. Back to our favorite comment from Rod Dreher, because right now we're being told, and we are forcing people to say that a transgender girl is a girl. In other words, a biological boy who says that I'm a girl is a girl. And we are destroying the sports. We're destroying the lives of individuals. And, of course, just completely upending Title IX? Isn't that?
Yes.
So you begin to see the impact of all of that. So if nothing else, we're going to take a break. This week we've been talking about hope for America, and one of the hope is to tell the truth and to speak the truth, and to speak the truth to power and to educate you, and that's what we do here on Point of View. And so as we wind down for this week, let me just mention that we do have a banner that says Hope for America. If you click on there, I'll give you some of the facts and figures about the fact that 73% of Americans believe the nation's founding ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance. And if you're one of those individuals, you might click on that button and make a small donation and help us out. We will be back. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Have you ever met a child that you knew would do great things? Perhaps they displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, a zeal for learning. Now imagine you take that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, you feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from mainstream media, and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive the facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you're with us the first hour, you might have heard the fact that we were talking about court packing and talking about what is at supremecoup.com. But we also mentioned that there would be an article coming out of the Wall Street Journal. Here it is. I just printed it out a minute ago. James Freeman, Mason-Dixon poll, Americans reject court packing, and talks about how reliable the particular surveys were in those. So if you would like to find this, and I want to give you some tools for your toolbox. You're going to have some people, especially since we found, 73% of Democrats that say, we think court packing is a good idea. They're going to need, if you're talking to them, some facts and figures and some information about that. And so there is a lot of material at, of course, First Liberty and at supremecoup.com. But also sometimes people say, but they are sort of maybe biased or something like that. Well, they can say, here's what the Wall Street Journal says. Here's what the Mason-Dixon Polling and Strategy Company do, and it just gives you some more tools for your toolbox. So I wanted to let you know that that's available. And before the hour is over, I think we'll talk about it again. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. Basically, one of the biggest points of if you read the story and really of the poll is, let's put the Republicans and Democrats aside. What an independence! How are they breaking on court packing? They reject it 2-1. They're against it. So I think that's just really, most people don't know much about it. When you begin to educate them, we found that goes way up. And so we'll see. But this is a good starting point to what's going to be a long battle. I mean, remember, there's this commission that the president has appointed is going to be, spend the next 6 months going through all this. And we certainly have seen the groups that want to push court packing on our country, spending money, demand justice, and all these other groups that are pushing for it very hard.
Let me just mention, too, that one article I'm hoping we'll get to this hour is by Victor Davis Hanson. And by the second page, you have him remind us that we've had a 9-member Supreme Court for 152 years. We've had a Senate filibuster for 184 years. And we've had a 62-year tradition of 50 states. What are we going to do with that extra state star for the District of Columbia?
They're already preparing flags.
Yeah, so again, just, if tradition means just even a little bit to you, or if nothing else, as the old G.K. Chesterton line was, before you tear down a fence, you might want to know why it was put up there in the first place. And why have we had 9 Supreme Court justice? Why have we had a filibuster for so long? There were some very good reasons for it.
Yes, and even the furthest left justices on the Supreme Court have both, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, before she died, was interviewed, and she said it's a bad idea. It would remove the legitimacy of the court. And then Stephen Breyer recently said that, basically that same message. So, it is a matter of education. And I think, we do need to talk more about the Victor Davis Hanson article, because it puts in a nutshell all the things the left are doing. And they've done it so fast since President Biden has taken office that, I guess we can only hope that the overreach will come back to bite them in the congressional elections coming up in 2022.
You know, talking about change, too, I've been saying that back in 1970, since I'm the old guy around the table, Alvin Toffler wrote a book called Future Shock, in which he said that the changes would be coming fast and furious. And then really, even in 1982, you had a book called Megatrends. Robert Nesbitt wrote about that as well. And again, it's kind of like what we just said about Ann Coulter. I just think they were just a few decades too early, because the change is coming so fast and furious, people can't even get their heads around it. So I thought I would go to one of the other articles, and Kelly is the one that first suggested we might use this. It's called Taking Off the Mask. The Department of Education just made it clear that it will promote critical race theory, and so we've posted that on the website. For those of you that get imprimis from Hillsdale, our good friend Christopher Rufo, critical race theory, what it is and how to fight it. But give us a little bit of an education, Penna. What is this critical race theory, and why are we so concerned about it?
Well, that's the article that you mentioned from Hillsdale from Chris Rufo is one that I just read. Like, we just got it in the mail yesterday. It still comes by mail, and it's tiny print, but he makes so much common sense. And, you know, he just says that we need to know what critical race theory is. We use the term a lot, and I'm not sure most Americans could actually explain what it is, but we need to know what it is so we can know how to fight it. And it's basically Marxism adapted to the racial unrest of the 60s. So before the 60s, they were trying to bring Marxism into the West, into Europe and the United States, but we weren't really willing to separate people on the basis of class in this country, because we have a different kind of system and country. So they brought race in, and of course we had all the racial unrest, but the civil rights movement was a little bit inconvenient for that, because the civil rights movement instead did some good for the country, and it brought in equality for blacks. And so it was kind of it was just sort of pushed to academia, and that's where critical race theory was until about the last 10 years. And suddenly it's back, and it's back in every institution across the nation. I mean, when you think about it, Chris Rufo himself studied what was going on in the federal government and all these classes that were teaching it to folks in government, and he exposed that, and Donald Trump banned it from the whole federal government. Well, Obama's now brought it back, but in a sense, they're aware. They're aware now of what's going on. And so they use this terminology called equity. It sounds like equality, but equality is, you know, a good principle providing equal opportunities. Equity is ensuring equal outcomes. And so, you know, that's really the essence of Marxism. So it's a Marxist sort of proposition based on race. Now they want to teach it to our kids. I mean, there are some places that are teaching it in our schools. They want to make it nationwide.
Yeah, ultimately, this Marxism and critical race theory is about try to make it as easy for people to understand as possible. It's about putting people in groups, that you are not identified as an individual. You are a group. You are either in an oppressed group or you are the oppressor group. So even though, so in other words, a wealthy Harvard law professor, rich, just privileged in every way, black professor is the oppressed, and the poor person who has no teeth and all these problems in their life and lives in a little shack maybe not even a shack, in a tent in the Appalachians, they're the oppressor. So it's nonsense. It's what Marxism does to try to create people as oppressors and the victims, and it creates these wars. In this case, it would be like a race war.
Race war.
And
instead of a class war.
It's really bad, and it's totally opposite of Christianity, which focuses on the individual and what they do, and not on trying to say, I'm going to hate you because what group you are, what color you are. Critical race theory is racism, and that's the problem with it. That's a problem with Marxism as well, is this sort of group mentality. Yeah, tribalism at its worst. And we'll take a break and have a few more things to talk about there. But if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Biden administration thinks that they may have found a way to promote higher corporate taxes to American voters. President Joe Biden and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen claim that it is all about ending the global race to the bottom. It is obvious that the president wants to raise our corporate taxes, but who knew that he also wanted to raise them across the world? He and the Treasury Secretary want to establish a minimum global corporate tax rate. A little history's in order. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act reformed America's corporate tax code after many other nations had already taken steps to reform their tax code. If you look at the various European countries in the OECD, most of them have a corporate tax rate similar to America's 21% corporate tax rate. President Biden wants to raise the corporate rate to 28%. That might encourage some companies to move their headquarters or their operations to other countries. And in the past, there were many news stories about corporate inversions where a company reincorporates abroad to reduce their tax burden. There haven't been too many news stories like that in recent years because of the 2017 corporate tax cut. If President Biden is successful in raising the U.S. corporate tax rate, he would hope that Secretary Yellen would also convince other countries to raise their rates so that America wouldn't lose U.S. companies. This attempt to establish a global minimum corporate tax rate is being portrayed as a global race to the bottom. Actually, it's a classic example of tax competition. Some countries are willing to have a lower tax rate to encourage business development. That is good for those countries and good for those companies. It's not a race to the bottom. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, talking for just a few more minutes about critical race theory, because again, sometimes, as Kelly points out, it's kind of philosophical, but I want to bring it down to what does this mean to your children and your grandchildren? And once you are seeing now the Department of Education teaching it, it's one thing, as we've talked about with Christopher Rufo, talking about sometimes being taught in the military. First of all, I hope people in the military would see through some of this, but when you're actually putting this as part of the curriculum, Penna, and teacher training for the K through 12 civics education, it's going to show up in terms of, well, maybe the 1619 project and teaching that whites are bad and blacks are oppressed. And it's going to be giving you a pretty good dose of what would be called cultural Marxism. So talk about that.
Yeah, there's one bill. This is out there. It's called the Civics Secures Democracy Act, which appropriates $1 billion for federal grants to support curriculum development and teacher training in civics education. And so they would be promoting critical race theory. And we've talked about the 1619 project before, this whole idea that has been promoted by the New York Times and really spread across the country to various schools that would take it, that say, you know, our country really began in 1619, and the reason that we were actually instituted was because of slavery, to perpetrate that. And, you know, it's been argued and debunked, but the Obama administration, even if there's no law that ever passes, like the civics law never passes, he is telling the Department of Education this will be implemented throughout the country. So it's dangerous, and really part of what critical race theory, I think, does is it turns the institutions in our society from Hollywood to education to the federal government against the people of the country. So again, it's a part of that revolution that we're talking about, that coup.
Yeah, it's I think it's going to be fascinating. Some of these things, I think the teaching will be harder to stop in a court, but some of these things are going to be stopped in court because they're racist. For instance, the bill that they passed, the coronavirus relief, that had hidden within it this idea that if you were a black farmer, they would forgive your loan, but only if you're a black farmer. So if you're a poor Hispanic farmer, no. But if you're a black farmer, well, that's just racist. And a lot of these things are clearly, you're using the institutions of government now to engage in racial discrimination, which is, it's just amazing how backwards we're going. It's like the idea of having segregated dorms at colleges. It really is bizarre to watch what's happening. But stuff like teaching and ideas, I think it'll be harder to stop through legal. There might be a way, I don't know, but I think it'll be more that the people are going to have to speak up. But people need to be certainly in their own local schools, in their own colleges where they're sending their kids. These are things that need to be checked. I know there's a professor that has a website or something out there where people can follow which colleges or which places are teaching critical race theory. But this is really poisonous stuff, and it's Marxism because it's trying to create a war, and it's doing it on the basis of race, which is poisonous in more than one way.
In education, I think Kelly's exactly right, and in education, that is where you do see people standing up because it's their kids, and they see that as very important. And I know that talk about splitting the country apart. You have the private schools where they don't have to do what the Department of Education says. So you'll have people, I think you're going to see people already, COVID has sent people to private schools. But you're going to see this kind of thing, sending people to private schools. When their 6-year-old has to start apologizing for being white, he's going to be out of the public school, and his parents are going to sacrifice to send him to the Christian or the conservative school in their area or start homeschooling. And it's already happening. Schools our parents are fighting back against this. And one area is Loudoun County, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
They were fighting back against the whole transgender issue in their schools. So they're very well organized there because they've got the left really kind of coming into that influential area of the country. Well, they now have this group called Parents Against Critical Theory. And they're organizing, and a lot of these people, they have their kids in public school, but they also they're well set financially so they can afford to fight back. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to separate the wealthy white people from, others. It's going to start just doing exactly what they want to do, separate people unless we fight back.
Just thinking, all three of us have grandchildren, and you think about what maybe isn't going to happen to our grandchildren, but happening to a lot of children, because first of all, you have critical race theory, which just really forces you to hate the country, and certainly to hate people that are different than you. And then you don't learn about our history, so you don't have a love for the country. And then we just talked about the fact that we have this whole transgender issue, so you have some young kids not only hating the country, but they're not sure whether to go to the men's bathroom or the girls' bathroom, the boys' bathroom, or whatever. They don't know who they are. And then, as we talked about yesterday, because of all this emphasis on the Earth climate and everything else, they're convinced that the Earth is going to end in 12 years. And we're engaged in, if you will, systemic child abuse right now with the things we're teaching in the public schools.
It truly is. It's funny when you mention grandchildren. So little kids, I've been noticing with my little grandchildren that they like to talk about a boy and a girl and the differences. They like to talk about dresses and dolls and pink, and they notice these things. It's not like somebody has to really teach them that, and yet our schools are doing their very best to then just kind of strip them of all that natural awareness. And I think on race, I know that one of my grandkids is in a private preschool, and, it's actually very diverse, very diverse. And, kids don't really care about that. They just like their friends.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is the separation and the division is being forced on them at a young age, and once it's it's hard to deprogram them when it begins at such a young age.
Well, let's, if we can, just before we take a break, get into one other one, and I called it, if nothing else, Pandemic and Normal Life, when life is normal. And it's talking about the fact that we mentioned the other day that when Slate suggested that maybe you no longer have to wear a mask outside, well, the whole woke mob came down on the editor, one of the editors of Slate. And I love about the fourth paragraph, it said, the rest of us normal people thought, wait a second, you guys are still wearing masks outside? What's going on about this? Because you're starting to see even a division among the left about whether or not you have to be wearing masks when you live outside, right?
Right, absolutely. It's never been anything that I've done. From day one, I never wore a mask outside unless I forgot to take it off when I came out of the grocery store.
There's not any. I mean, there's a debate about masks in general and what they really do, but when it comes to wearing a mask outside, there's no real debate about that. I mean, I've seen some true scientists, not Fauci types who go out and say things one day and change their mind the next day based upon no evidence, just because they want to say what they want to say. But I've seen some real scientists get out and say that the dispersal in the air is so quick and so it doesn't pass. Even if you're walking by there's people like you're walking by as you're walking and they think they need to put their mask on, and they've said no, you don't. Yep. So it really doesn't make it doesn't make any sense.
No, and it's actually dangerous if you're trying to do some sort of
You're
athletics
jogging
outside, you're
anything.
running, you're trying to ride your bike, and you're exerting some energy. I mean, I don't feel good when I wear one anyway.
I love this. In Arlington, Virginia, I still spot people wearing masks while driving in their cars or sitting alone in parks. Did I not notice the President of the United States in a Zoom call yesterday on the Earth Summit wearing a mask? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I understand what they're trying to do, and it's stupid. They're trying to he needs to be a good example. Well, what example what message do you think he sends when he's wearing a mask on Zoom? He's sending the message that, this whole mask thing is not real because obviously I wouldn't be wearing it during my Zoom call. So if you're...
I don't get any of this anymore.
You just blow your credibility by doing something silly. Like, if you want to send a message, send a logical message, not a message that everybody knows is not a real message.
Yeah, it's really a sign whether you're a far left liberal or a conservative. It's
Well,
kind
anyway,
of a little sign that you paste on your face.
It is. It's a virtue signaling. In other ways, we put that as our third article. But we come back from the break. Kelly, I want to put you on the spot. We've had some people off air saying, okay, what about this court packing? Let me maybe ask a couple of the tough questions. Because the other day they put Senator Ted Cruz on the spot. I don't know how he answered him, but I know you'll have some answers for some of this. So we'll get into that. And before we're all done, I do think we might want to delve into the Victor Davis Hanson piece, which is so well written, and it's just one of the many articles we've posted. So just a lot of material on the website, pointofview.net. But last half hour, if you'd like to call us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Have you ever met a child that you knew would do great things? Perhaps they displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, a zeal for learning. Now imagine you take that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, you feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from mainstream media, and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive the facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. And our second article here, First Steps to Pack the Court, by Liberty McCarter, who, of course, has written various things not only for First Liberty, but also for Point of View. So it's one more article, another tool for your toolbox. But I thought for just a few minutes, we had some people asking about, well, what about the arguments being made against the Republicans? And there's kind of one that's being made by our side, one made by the other side. But let's take that one first. Really coming down on Senator Ted Cruz the other day saying, now, wait a minute, you guys are complaining about packing the court, but look at the fact that Merrick Garland is not on the Supreme Court. He's actually the Attorney General. And we've even had individuals suggesting, no, we're not packing the court. We're just unpacking the court. So how about that issue?
Well, it's false. It's not. They're pretending like they don't know what packing the court means. Filling seats that are open through the normal process in the Constitution is what we've always done. I mean, yes, 3 seats opened. Well, if you count the one right at the end when you had of the Obama term and you had a seat open under Scalia, and you have divided government of the Senate and the president being opposite. That seat was open coming into the election, which actually made it even more legit when one of the reasons that they were electing president was who they wanted to fill that seat. But there was that one, and then the 2 that opened during President Trump's term. Like any president, like pretty much every president, he filled the seats. Yeah, but Ginsburg was really close to the end of his term. Yeah, like every other president, he filled the seat. When the party and the president are the same and a seat opens, they're going to fill the seat. Now, if they're different, they're going to be a problem because they both got to come to an agreement if they're different parties. So all they did is fill the seats that were open, which is what you do. Court packing is very different. Court packing is to actually change the Supreme Court. It's to add members to the Supreme Court. It's the bill that was passed said, oh, we've had 9 justices since, flight was discovered. Thomas Edison discovered the light bulb. We've had 9 justices, but we're going to add 4. 4? Why 4? Well, there's 3 liberals and there's 6 conservatives. So that'll give us 7 liberals and 6 conservatives. When you do that, when the party in power adds justices to get to the conclusion they want to politically, the court is over. I mean, it's over. It is now simply an adjunct underneath the president and the Congress political party that's in power. And at that point, you don't have an independent judiciary. You don't have constitutional rights because they can just add however many justices. It doesn't have to be 4. You can be Hugo Chavez. He added 12. And there have now been, under Chavez and Maduro, 45,000 opinions. 0 disagree with the government. 0. So once you do this new process of adding to the court, you are packing the court, meaning you are adding members to the court and you are destroying the independence of the judiciary. You're destroying the rule of law. Justice is now no longer controlled by an independent judicial body. It's now controlled by the political power party in power. And so it's a totally different thing. We've seen it in other countries. What happens, you devolve into tyranny fairly quickly, and you're destroying one of the 3 branches of government. You're just kind of putting it as an adjunct under the other 2.
So a couple questions. One, this commission was announced by President Biden. 180 days, as you said, it's going to be an issue for a while. But it was like within 5 days or something that the House then passed a court packing bill. And, of course, it's going to be more of a fight in the Senate. But it's like, is this commission just for show?
Somewhat. It's depending upon who you ask, it's either 3-1 or maybe as much as 5-1 liberal.
Yeah.
And what do they come out with? I think they'll come out with some sort of combination. Court packing is so disfavored that they'll probably try to do it in a very underhanded way. So, for instance, they might come out and say, we think the justices need to have, terms
Term
and
limits.
not to be light.
Yeah.
And so we'll make it 18 years, and they'll serve 18-year terms. But because we're just starting the process, we'll let President Biden pick 2 to put on the court. Okay, well, you're now court packing. Okay, you're just trying to cover it. But this is what they've said they want. It's what demand justice is. What the more radical elements of the left. This is what they've been demanding before the election. They're demanding after the election, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are on their side to do this. Because think about it. If you're the left right now, you have control of all the institutions. You control education, you control media, you control Hollywood, you control the presidency, the House and the Senate. The only thing you don't have right now is the courts. And so this is what you want. And the problem is you're destroying the court when you politicize and take over the courts in this way, as we've seen from history, as we saw from our own history in 1936 and 37. You destroy the independence of the judiciary. And they all knew that. The Democrats stood up and said, this is courting tyranny. We will not allow this to happen. So that's where we are today.
When you look at these things that are going to be considered by this commission, one of them is the court's case selection rules and practices. I mean, the court usually decides what it's going to do, what it's going to take up. That's the court's role. But even that is going to be micromanaged if we allow it to.
And step back and ask yourself, okay, this whole commission is because we need to, quote, reform the United States Supreme Court.
We do?
Yeah, exactly. Proof? Why we need to reform the court? Well, we need to reform the court because President Biden said, quote, it's out of whack. Well, okay, I'm overwhelmed by that argument. There is no rationale for reforming the court except we don't like that the court, this is what they're saying, we don't like that the court are actually full of originalists now who look to the actual text and won't do the political bidding that we want the court to do. And they don't like that the court is not liberal and they want to change the court. I mean, everybody knows that. What a coincidence that they want to add 4 justices. So, I mean, everybody can see through this. They know what they're trying to do.
One other question that people oftentimes ask is, well, why is this a big deal? Because after all, you've already told us of one liberal member of the court who's against this, a former liberal member who's no longer alive against this. We have most Republicans seem to be against this. So is this just trying to give a solution for a problem that doesn't exist? How about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you might look at the polls and you say, well, look, the poll you guys just released and the Wall Street Journal just announced today is that 65% of the country is totally against this. Yeah, but over 70% of the Democrats are for it, and they're the ones that control whether you do this or not. So this is a real danger. This very well could happen, and if it happens, I mean, again, I don't say things that I can't back up, or I'm not trying to, I don't try to scare people. I really believe that if this happens, our country is over. The rule of law is over. If you look at what happens in other countries, if you look at what almost happened to us in 36 and 37, it really does change our country forever in a way that I don't think we come back. The other thing that I would say to this argument that, we don't have to worry about this, people are against it, is you not only have to stop this, you have to delegitimize this in public. Because what happened under FDR is they did not, the country reacted strongly against this. But he so scared the courts that the court totally flipped. And all of his New Deal legislation got through. Changed the court for over a decade. And that's what will happen to our court if we don't all come the nation doesn't stand up and say, this will never happen in our country. We're not Venezuela, and we're not going to allow this to happen. We need to not only stop court packing, we need to really slay this in front of the entire country as being something we do not accept.
So again, if you go to the website, the first article actually is a link to Supreme Court coup, so you don't even have to remember that, but it's SupremeCourtCout.com. So
SupremeCout.com.
Supreme Coup, excuse me, I said it wrong, so that's why it's a good thing to have it there. And so we got that one. Then you go to the third article, and that's the one by Liberty McCarter, and that's one about the first steps Democrats are taking to pack the court, in case you want to know about the commission, who's on it, and what they want to do. We come back. Do we have a nation on the edge? How much ruin do we have left? That's a question by Victor Davis Hanson. We'll talk about that right after this.
Legislators in Alabama recently passed and sent to their governor a law prohibiting K-12 schools from allowing biological boys to participate in girls' sports. That same week, North Dakota passed a similar bill. Other states, about 30 altogether, are considering or have already enacted legislation to protect girls' sports and to prevent female athletes from losing medals, titles, and scholarship opportunities to males who identify as females. The legislation in Alabama and North Dakota sent a message that their states will not be bullied by the National Collegiate Athletic Association. The votes in these states came within 48 hours of the NCAA's warning that it will be monitoring states' legislative activity and will not send an NCAA tournament to any state that prohibits biological boys from playing on girls' athletic teams. The organization stated, "This commitment is grounded in our values of inclusion and fair competition. This is not fair. Anyone with a pair of eyes and common sense understands that biological men competing against women have an unfair advantage in terms of physical strength. The NCAA says it requires testosterone suppression treatment for transgender women, i.e. biological men, to compete in women's sports. But the effects of testosterone on the male body remain. A new study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine affirms the athletic advantage of males undergoing testosterone-suppressing treatment over biological females. A compilation of other research shows that the muscular advantage enjoyed by trans women only falls by 5% the first year. Florida's State House was also quick to respond to the NCAA's threat by passing a bill banning biological men from women's teams. Senator Rick Scott tweeted a warning. If you keep threatening the public with your woke, elitist psychobabble, the NCAA will not last much longer. It's good to see states pushing back against one of the woke sports organizations trying to force its insanity on us. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes again, weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. I have this is our last article on the website, and I titled it "Nation on the Edge." But Victor Davis Hanson actually asked the question this way: how much ruin do we have left? In other words, since we are seeing so many statements, so many policies, so many actions, so many pieces of legislation that can really ruin the republic, how much do we have left? And Penna Dexter, this goes on for a couple of pages, but I think it, as always, is very well written by Victor Davis Hanson.
Kind of a good way to end the show today. Not that we want to end on a negative, but Victor Davis Hanson is very good at tying things together, and that's what he does in this piece. And, the last few months, of course, we've seen it just began. I mean, they talked about it during the campaigns, but I don't know. I didn't expect it to all hit so fast. And the first thing, of course, was H.R. 1 and the effort to nationalize the elections. And right along with it is opposing any attempt by any state to try to make its elections more fair. So you've got those two things going on simultaneously. And if the federal government gets a hold of the elections and does everything that it does in that bill, then we'll probably never see conservative governance again, just from that one. And then the court packing is another permanent change to the country when you ruin the courts. And as we see right now, the courts are the only really bulwark we have against some of these freedom-grabbing policies. And then the filibuster, because of the close divided government that we have, especially the Senate, 50-50, you've got this attack on the filibuster, and we don't know whether the filibuster will be jettisoned or not. If it is, then you're going to be able to pass some of this stuff very quickly, and that, again, will be a big nation-changing development. And then just the deficits, the federal deficits, and the money that's being spent, the national debt, the raising in taxes that they want to do for this infrastructure bill, that's going to be a big change. And then the schools, the issue that we've just been talking about, forcing curricula that moves our country far to the left, that really turns it into a Marxist society. And when you start teaching kids that they need to be apologizing because of the way that the race that they were born, and that they need to see boys and girls as, a fluid situation, whatever you would choose to be. And then one more thing that he mentions, and that is just the cancel culture. Mm-hmm. The idea that you can't even speak your opposition without a tremendous amount of courage, which is something we all need to gin up.
Kelly, I want to talk for just a minute about why all of this so fast. And you've talked about one thing, the kind of the lesson learned from the Obama administration, that you have to hit it hard. But yesterday we got to talk about another one. Since World War II, when the president in power is of one political party, during the first midterm elections, oftentimes you have as many as 56 votes go the other direction, and even 4 senators. So there is a sense in which right now that, isn't it interesting that Nancy Pelosi didn't even want to put this bill originally out for court packing, because she just saw that would be another thing that would just guarantee that she will not be the Speaker of the House, or that Democrats will not have control of the House of Representatives. So there is a sense in which they maybe think the clock is ticking, and so all of this is coming fast and furious because they recognize their days are numbered.
Yeah, I think I really do think that's what they think they learned from the Obama administration, is go hard and go fast with the most extreme stuff you can, because, you only have a certain amount of time, and there's going to be a backlash. Not just to that, but just because in the off-year elections, in the midterms, you've got this situation where the people that love the party in power are not as motivated to come out as the people who are terrified by what they're seeing. And so those people, whether they're against Trump or in this case against Biden, and they see the most radical stuff we've ever seen being proposed all over the place, and executive orders left and right, they know that that's going to happen. Plus, add to that redistricting. There's been, a census, and there's going to be redistricting, which means the state legislatures redraw all those lines for the congressional seats, which makes a huge difference how you draw those lines. Well, Republicans hold more state legislatures than ever in the history of the country. So that line drawing is going to end up adding to Republican side, plus just the population from the census itself. You've got the population is moving towards the Republican states. It's moving towards the Texas, the Florida, and the more liberal states are losing. Illinois, they're losing seats. So you've got all that going. It'll be highly likely that if they don't totally, have a federal takeover of all the election laws and really take over all the authority of all the states that they've had forever, then this is what's going to happen. There's going to be a heavy swing back next year in the elections. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see really radical things like H.R. 1 being tried, is because they want to, they don't like the results of the American people having their say that are going to be coming, and they'd rather just take everything over.
And, I think the question is how permanent, if you defeat these policies, how permanent is that defeat? Sometimes when they try once, then they can try again. But I think the important thing is here, and you've mentioned it with relation to court packing, but all of it, we need to really make the case and, again, have courage. The more people that are conservatives, and I take this down to the millennial and Generation Z, the more people talking common sense about these issues and really getting it into the public psyche, then, we can stop this from popping up again in the next couple decades.
And what I would love to see, and I don't know if this is possible, but is everybody stop with the conclusions and what is the basis for your conclusion? Because what a lot of times these folks are doing, especially, my daughters, certainly in conversations with other people, they're all going by something that they've heard, and they don't know any evidence for it. And people need to do their homework to, if you say the bill is that bill is, you name what, racist. Okay, why? What are the provisions? And look at it. And so the more we can have citizens actually having real discussions with real information, the better. That is not the way of the evil one. It's lies, it's subterfuge, it's, and that's what we're seeing a lot of. And I think most Americans actually have great agreement on a lot of these issues. 80% of the country thinks that you should have an ID. You mean it's not racist? No, 70% of black Americans think you should show an ID before you vote. So they're making these things into divisions because they're going with conclusions instead of really talking about the real facts, where there's a lot of agreement amongst a lot of Americans.
Well, we're going to the weekend, and certainly we're running out of time, so I'm going to give you an assignment. Go to supremecoup.com. There's a 4-minute video. It's only going to take 4 minutes out of your life. You can watch the video and then get some of that information. The poll that is there you can find, or else you can go to Wall Street Journal, and that just got posted a few minutes ago, and that will give you some tools to make the case. So that's certainly the assignment. That's not a big assignment.
Not too hard.
Not that kind of assignments I used to get over the weekend from some of my teachers. And let me just mention, next week we're going to have George Barna. Kel Beisner will be with us. We were talking about the other day, Earth Day. We'll get back into the whole issue of Green New Deal. Jim Dennison will be with us and a number of others. And, of course, most importantly, I'm glad to have Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford here. Penna's commentary will show up in your inbox tomorrow if you sign up. And I hope you'll have a great weekend. But first of all, I want to thank Andrew for his help and for Steve as well. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday on Point of View.
Have you ever met a child that you knew would do great things? Perhaps they displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, a zeal for learning. Now imagine you take that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, you feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from mainstream media, and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive the facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.